Hi, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On today's episode, I am talking to the designer, educator, and curator Jon Sueda. Jon is the founder of Stripe, a graphic design studio in San Francisco that specializes in printed matter, identities, and exhibition design, and is the chair of the MFA Design program at California College of Arts. He was also the co-editor of the Task newsletter and has curated exhibitions about speculative design, California design, and an interesting show about the intersection of exhibition design and the visual arts. I first came across Jon's work a few years ago when I was living in San Francisco. I saw his 2014 exhibition, All Possible Futures, which looked at speculative design and unrealized projects from contemporary designers like Experimental Jet Set, Project Projects, Karl Martens, and Solke and Min. And I was really impressed with the show and the accompanying book's intellect and investigation into these alternative practices. So I've been following his work ever since, and last fall I talked with Jon via Skype to talk about his design background, the intersection of his various activities, and the relationship between curating and design. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jon Sueda. The place that I wanted to start is I actually rewatched in preparation for this your Walker Art Center talk, which was you kind of covered similar things, and you had this title, When Worlds Collide, and you had these three circles of kind of your three ways that your practice operates. Like, I think it was like client work, self-generated work, and teaching. And so I kind of wanted to start with that idea of those three separate things and how you came to be doing those separate things. Is that, how did you kind of get into design and then kind of break out into all those other areas?
Well, I first got in, my undergraduate degrees in fine art, and I went to UC Davis. But to be totally honest, I was completely focused on playing tennis.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was like my first sort of passion in high school. I played really serious tennis, and I played in college, and going to college was more a vehicle toward trying to get on the best tennis program possible. That's
amazing.
So UC Davis had was I think they were the national champs in like Division II. They were really good, and they had a really great coach, and that's pretty much the reason I went there. And and I
love it.
Yeah, and I actually was my father's an architect, and I was really kind of given a lot of art kind of opportunities growing up, so that was like the natural thing to go into kind of. And but I have to say it was really a sidebar to my other passion at the moment, and at that moment. And then design became a sort of excuse of what I told my parents I was going to do when I graduated, because I couldn't think of anything else.
Right.
and then when it actually happened that I graduated, I was working at Rasputin Records in Berkeley, and I just ended up making these signs, like these foam core airbrush signs, and then somehow that just led to me applying to CCA to graphic design courses, because that's what I had been telling my parents I was going to be doing all along. And then it kind of, I met Martin Vineski, who was one of my teachers pretty early on, and he really changed what I thought design could be. And I took his course a couple times, so I went to CCA maybe for a year and a half or something, and I something like that, and I took his class a couple times, and he hired me actually to be his assistant. And so that was my sort of entry point to design. And it was kind of weird because it was sort of a backwards entry, because I kind of learned design from him in a way, at a really high level, conceptual or formal level, and I kind of skipped all the basics. and
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
it's really weird. And so I kind of had my skills were really kind of backwards. Like I was doing all these weird kind of breaking all the rules of design without really knowing the basics a lot at
Right.
the beginning.
Right.
And yeah, so that was sort of my entry, and that the kind of practice that he had, which was like a one person small studio doing really like Speak Magazine was like his main thing, and it was doing these sort of like kind of bringing experimentation to sort of real projects, and having a real authorship in the work in that sort of that way, that 90s sort of way. Anyway, that was where I entered design, and I think that kind of set the groundwork for a lot of things that I ended up doing, like going back to school. And I kind of did. I have to say, he was such a big influence on me at the beginning. Like he was an intern at Studio Dunbar. I applied to Studio Dunbar. I ended up getting an internship there. I kind of did. I didn't get into Cranbrook, but I went to CalArts, and so I kind of did a lot of. He kind of was a big inspiration to me early on, and I kind of followed in that mold because what he was doing is what I wanted to do. So I figured just following that would kind of end up in a good result.
So did you? I mean, it's interesting because like I feel like in a lot of ways that mirrors a lot of how I kind of got into design also. And I've told this to a couple of people that I've interviewed already, that I kind of discovered design when I was in high school. And I grew up in like suburban Pennsylvania, had never met a real graphic designer before, but this was the early 2000s. So it was right when design blogs were kind of starting. And so I was learning about kind of theory and history and stuff before I ever had opened Illustrator or knew what kerning was.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so like then when I actually got to school and did that part, I kind of had all this history, but didn't know how to actually kind of do it. So it's interesting because it sounds like that's in a way similar to kind of how you came to it also. I'm curious how, after working for Martin, how long was it before you went to CalArts?
I think it was, let's see. So I was with Martin in the late like 96, 97, and then I think I actually tried to move. I'm from Hawaii originally, and so I tried to move home because I was kind of homesick at that time. So I moved home to Hawaii, and then I taught at the university for a year. Because I guess the thing is, I still had the aspiration to have this particular type of practice, but I was really naive, and I moved to Hawaii and thought I could do it there, but it really there just wasn't that community or the kinds of projects that facilitated making that type of work there. It's very tourist industry driven, and it's hard to bring that kind of lens to making brochures about like touristic kind of
Right. Yeah, yeah.
industries, and so it's quite frustrating, and so teaching kind of fell into my lap there, and the whole program at UH is run by people from Yale, and which is kind of weird, but I kind of got in there. Yeah, it's all like Ann Bush, who went to Yale in the 90s, I think, and and there was another guy who I met there um, named Stewart, who is really like a mentor to me early on, to kind of because I was kind of stepping into like a highly theoretical conceptual space that I didn't really know about that at that time. I have to say I was very much a formalist at the beginning. That's what sort of was my entry point to working with Martin, and I think the big conflict with me early on was like I could do the form, but I didn't know why I was doing it, and I think that kind of drove me toward going back to school because I kind of wanted to have a consciousness about it because I didn't have it. I could make stuff if Martin was sitting next to me and like talking to me about it. I could generate it, but I didn't really have a sense of why or what I was doing really beyond just making the work. So I think going to CalArts, I taught for a year and I went back to CalArts, and that was I sort of both a moment to gain that kind of consciousness, but also kind of reinvent myself because I had, I feel like I was very much like a formal stylist, I would say. I could do work that looked like in that style that Martin did, but it wasn't very kind of authentic to my own thinking or myself because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Right.
And so it was a moment to like reimagine my work and kind of actually learn the kind of basics. Like I actually went to CalArts and learned about typography in a really almost like basic way because I missed all that stuff and understand why form looks the way it does based on history and all this stuff I kind of skipped over basically and yeah, so there was a kind of a reinvention of my work because obviously I think my work now doesn't. I think the funny thing is I think I was so tied to Martin at the beginning, but our work now looks completely different and it kind of is doing totally different things, but we still really share a lot of like we agree on mostly everything I would say, but just the work looks different now because I feel like I kind of figured out how I wanted to work in some way. Mhm.
And that do you think that happened kind of going to CalArts and I don't know, like almost kind of breaking yourself of these patterns that you had learned?
Yeah, it was also my faculty there like kind of bashed kind of was pretty hard on me because of that as well because they kind of were just like, oh, you're just doing the same thing you were doing before and like can you do something. They just really pushed me to sort of rethink how I would work and be, kind of find my own kind of voice or whatever. And also I think it was a moment, I think I went to school in the year 2000, which was, you could see that 90s wave coming down. It was because I kind of joined design in the mid 90s when this wave was at its peak and you could see it, David Carson and like my first lecture I went to was David Carson in the like 1995 and like it was like a rock concert and people were throwing stuff at the stage. It was so bizarre because you just didn't, that's what graphic design is and 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 you know and but you could kind of see the end when I started and it was kind of sad because I also feel like I've kind of joined everything at the end. Like it's I wish I was, you were like, I wish I went to school 5 years before when the wave was at its peak and you could be part of that. But I feel like everything I've done, it's like the end of something cool and it's like the transition to something new. So when I went to school, everybody's like, what do you do? You can't do this anymore. Like, what do you do next? And it was really a confusing period. And you're kind of in the middle of you came to school to do this thing that's now no longer, you can tell the relevancy is kind of ending and trying to think of what to do next, which actually in retrospect was super great in a way, but at the moment you're kind of feel like you missed the boat a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though to actually hear you say that because the 90s were this kind of big kind of postmodernism, David Carson, but there was also this kind of big interest in theory. And a lot of CalArts people were very influential in that. And I'm thinking of like Lorraine Wild or, kind of Jeffery Keedy. Did you have that? Were they your professors when you were there?
Yeah, Keedy was a Keedy, Michael Worthington, Lorraine, Ed, all the people that were doing, that was at that time CalArts and kind of Cranbrook were the schools that you would that were kind of at the height of the that kind of that time and they were kind of producing all the design discourse that was going on through Immigré and lecturing and stuff like that. And so yeah, it was sort of the place to be at the time. So yeah, that's why I went there really to be part of that. And yeah, they were great. I think I still to this day have a really good dialogue with all those people. And yeah, although they're not pretty, that it was sort of again, like Immigrate ended in like 2006 or something,
Yeah.
something like that. But like, it was sort of it was the tailing off of a lot of that discourse and design history and theory being kind of produced by its own practitioners and stuff like that. And it was a change. In the mid 2006 or something, there was this real shift in where that dialogue came from and sort of the rigor of it. Maybe, I don't know. It's different. It's just different. It's a
Yeah.
different kind of rigor.
I mean, all of them are people who are on my list to hopefully eventually talk to for this project, because I'm very curious kind of about that shift also, and for those people that were these big voices, what was their perspective on that? And it's interesting because you're kind of a student in the middle of all this. Was it changing how you were thinking about the design work that you were doing, kind of being in that environment and being a part of that discourse?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think again in that moment, students were kind of questioning all that theory, and it was like, what's is that still I think another one of my design heroes was this guy named Alan Horry. I don't know if you remember him. He was like a Cranbrook guy in the like late 80s who makes this made amazing work, and it was work that was about theory in a way. It was like about um it was literally like about that kind of theory, and it was really hard to um I found it very difficult to channel the theory directly into the work so self-consciously, although it was something that I was aspiring to do, but it didn't come very natural to me. Like I felt like it was kind of like a block in a way. And so I don't think I rejected that stuff at all. I totally, was engaged. I read a lot, and we had amazing kind of this design theory class with Jeff, Keedy, and it was really great to, have this rigorous discourse about that material. But I think a lot of students, including myself, were just sort of questioning how you channeled that knowledge into making work. And
Right.
and maybe it was a little bit different than that previous generation. Um, yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's such a long time ago. Like
Yeah.
I just went to CalArts last year and realized I graduated like 14 years ago or something like that. So it's really, the memory of it is really.
Yeah. Well, how kind of, after you graduated from there and started working, the environment when you were there, did that kind of translate into your postgraduate kind of career? And
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I
Go.
mean, the thing that I'm thinking of specifically is just kind of all your curatorial activities feel like they might be a kind of direct relation to that, but I was curious kind of how you see that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so in a bunch of different ways. So, um, you know, after school, I left. I went to NC State. My teacher my teacher Denise Gonzalez Chris was my teacher at CalArts, and she got the job as chair of NC State when I graduated, and she invited me to like come with her and teach a course for us basically for a year, but I could only stay for a semester because I had this internship set up at Studio Dunbar in January, so I just went for a semester and I moved to Holland. But um, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. But when I came back from Holland, I basically just try to recreate this sort of grad school atmosphere. Gail Swanlin was also faculty at CCA that I kind of teamed up with. We got a studio and shared it with a few other people like Sean Donahue, who is a guy who went to Art Center. And we just, had this sort of collective group that kind of recreated the kind of, whatever you want to call it, sort of grad school studio atmosphere. Also, the way that I remember Martin working too, because Martin had a small studio, and Jeff Kaplan, who was also another Cranbrook guy, was a guy that we were in the space with. So it was, kind of recreating that kind of environment. When it comes to the exhibitions and stuff, see, that's the funny thing. My first exhibition was at CalArts. Actually, Jeff Kaplan, who I knew from Martin, was in LA at the time, and I visited him right before I was about to start, and I said that I wanted to do an exhibition while I was at CalArts, but because I wanted to design books, so I needed to do an exhibition so I would have content to design a book. So it was completely not about exhibitions at the time. It was like, I need to generate something that I can make a book with, because I wanted to do catalogs or something, art catalogs.
Yeah, that was literally going to be my next question. Was like, what were you thinking that made you want to do that? And so it was
it's funny.
You could design something.
It was because I could design something. So Jeff's like, you should curate an exhibition about the history of typefaces at CalArts, and I'm like, okay. And so that's what I did. So when the fall of my first year, I proposed that I was going to do this, and I teamed up with one of my classmates named Stuart Smith, who we just basically like went through this archive of posters and typefaces for the entire first year, and commissioned a lot of new work from previous graduates who had designed typefaces, and we did this really big show the fall of my second year. That was basically like the first kind of exhibition I ever organized and curated, and we made a little book out of it. And but that it's funny, and then yeah, so that was the beginning of it. And then when I had my own studio a year and a half later in LA, I wanted to, again, I think it was not in the aim of being a curator or anything like that. It was like I wanted to recreate the sort of critical space that I remember in school. So I started creating these events at this public art center like across the street from my studio. So I'd rent it out for 3 hours on Sundays and say, oh, maybe we would do a lecture or something. And just somehow, because there was space, it ended up being that we started doing exhibitions. So we would invite people to do a lecture, and they would have all this work. So we just sort of set up these really short 3-hour exhibitions. And I think that slowly got me interested in the exhibition part of it more than like the book part of it. But it was this really interesting constraint of, you have 3 hours and you have no money. So like, what can you do in 3 hours that would be interesting? And that was a really sort of productive platform to just experiment with, really like messy and quick ideas of how to, or it forced you to be sort of conceptual, because you just had you had no ability to make something super aesthetic in a way, because it was just like, you had tables, you had a couple walls, and you had some push pins, and you would just like do them really quick, and you'd take it down. So
yeah, that's interesting. So I think that it's interesting that was it almost was an accident that you kind of even fell into that.
Yeah,
how much of exhibitions and curating is a part of what would you say is your job now?
Now, well, okay. I mean, now I'm the chair of the grad program at CCA, and it's I sort of felt everything I've sort of fallen into. I never had when I first started, it was never like a goal that I'd be a chair of an MFA program, really. But it was never a goal that I would be curate exhibitions either. So there's all these sort of things that just happen kind of organically. But and before I took the job as chair, I was kind of on this path of, I had curated about 3 really pretty big graphic design exhibitions, and that was really what I was on the path toward doing. And then this opportunity came to be the chair of the MFA program at CCA, and it sort of shifted whatever you want to call that sort of curatorial practices. It's sort of a different thing, kind of, organizing a curriculum and a program, and bringing together people, and organizing types of events and content that drive a particular kind of making that we're interested in fostering at the program, which is, I would say, really connected to the kind of maybe cross-disciplinary approach that I was, kind of starting to develop in my own work. So yeah, it's just sort of shifted, but I still see it through a particular kind of lens that's similar to what I was doing before.
Yeah. How to come back, because teaching was going to be my next question, was about teaching, but I kind of want to follow this for a second, going back to the Walker Art Center talk of how these things start to come together into one kind of practice. How did that kind of start to happen for you, and how do those things interact with each other, your kind of independent practice and teaching? And
It's weird because, again, I think at the beginning, and I think I said this in the Walker talk, I think that at the beginning they were really different. But I just think at the beginning you just are just doing whatever you can do to kind of survive. So I was taking any teaching that I could get, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with my interest in my work, really. They were just, you just take what you can get. I was doing these beginning like type or design courses that are kind of foundational. And then I was, just taking any kind of design projects that I could get when I first started my studio. And then you have these self-generated projects that were basically what I really wanted to be doing. And then slowly they just start to converge after you start to teach a little bit more. People give you more options of what you really would want to teach, and then you can, start teaching those types of things. And then you get projects after years that are more the kinds of things that you want to be doing. And they, it just naturally, I think with everybody, it would probably do that. And I think it's the ideal that these things start to become like not be able to pull them apart so easy. So maybe 6 years down the line, you're doing, especially when I was with the Wattis, it's like you're the sort of, I was the design director at the Wattis, where I'm working with a curator, and you're working on exhibitions and with a curator and artists, and making catalogs and working on exhibition spaces. And then I was teaching like an exhibition course, so it's like kind of literal. And then and then in your independent work, you're kind of curating the exhibitions. You're kind of taking on the responsibility that like the curators that I worked with at the Wattis were doing, kind of like the collapsing all of it into one thing. And there's just a really big, the overlap is kind of seamless, especially because it was all at CCA. So I was the design director at the Wattis at CCA while I was teaching at CCA, and one of the classes was an exhibition course that was connected to an exhibition I curated at CCA. So it was all like became like one thing. And yeah, so it's really super fortunate. It's really a kind of a lucky break for me that everything kind of came together so well eventually.
yeah. I want to kind of shift a little bit to the idea of design criticism, and I was curious if you kind of see the work that you do as a teacher and doing exhibitions as kind of a form of criticism.
Sure. I mean, I think it is, but I don't think about it that way so much. I think I get a lot of questions from people about framing what I do. Like, I don't, at the end of the Walker thing, someone asked me if what I'm doing is a form of scholarship, and I was like, huh.
Oh, right.
I
Right.
know, and I had a really big problem answering that question because sometimes I don't think of like the reason why I start doing it isn't for these reasons really, and I don't think about it that way because I think I don't know whether it's a mechanism that I built into my brain to like take as much of the weight off of what I'm doing as possible, so I actually don't come up with excuses not to do it. And I don't even think about that either, you know. But until maybe after I do them, I'm like, wow, maybe that was a little bit a risk, but
Yeah.
like, but at the time, I don't. I mean, I think that's part of the way. I don't know if it is a. It's sort of weird to sort of think of how your own brain works, but it's a way of. I think I do first and think later sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I don't talk myself out of not doing things somehow, and so I don't think about it. I think if I thought, oh, this is like this body of work that's gonna be this this critical lens about design at the moment, I might kind of feel like that was too much pressure to put on myself. And I always think of it as I'm trying to create conversation and provoke a discussion about design, and that's where I frame it. And in that action, it ends up being kind of being critical at the same time, a form of criticism. The work becomes a form of criticism. Yeah, so that's kind of how I think about it.
I mean that actually leads perfectly into the two next questions that I had, and they're kind of unrelated, but I'm going to try to put them together into one question. Um, One is, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about your section in the experimental jet set book, the fragment of the index of fragments, which was my favorite part of that book,
Oh, thanks.
and was actually a key to for me to understand the whole book and in a way understand all of experimental jet set's work.
Uh-huh.
They've been a studio that I've known for years and have kind of followed, but had never really thought about like critically. And your section kind of got me to do that in a way that I hadn't before. And so I see it kind of like you were saying as like this way to start. I saw that section as a way to start a dialogue about their work that hadn't been started before. So that's one. Maybe that's not a question, and it's just a compliment to you.
Thanks.
But that kind of leads into my second question is about this idea of dialogue within the profession and kind of the state of that and the things that the things that designers are talking about right now. What are your feelings on kind of the dialogue amongst designers, or are there things that are kind of current that you think designers should be talking about and thinking about that aren't, or are there things that they are that you think are important?
Wow.
That's a big. I realize that's a big question.
Yeah. I think that's a tough question because I think design dialogue is sort of all over the place. Like there's so many things being discussed, and there's so many intersections between different disciplines that are having different kinds of conversations. There's, in the Bay Area, there's, the word graphic design, the term graphic design is even kind of a dying kind of title. People are becoming, all of my students from 6 years ago, I look at them on LinkedIn and they're all interaction designers now. And there's all kinds of discussions happening, and I don't kind of privilege any any in particular. I feel like the part that I'm involved in is a really specific little blip on the big sort of like scope of what the profession is. So I don't claim to even understand or know every single dialogue that's going on, besides maybe the one that I'm having with particular people. And yeah, so I don't really have a great answer for that, besides what I'm kind of involved in, and people that I'm sort of interested in. Yeah. That's not a great answer,
Yeah,
but
I mean, no, that's interesting because that was something else that I wanted to ask you about. The All Possible Futures exhibition was something that was kind of very uh, um, very important to me when I saw it, and I have the book and it's well worn, and I refer back to it a lot. And that's something that I feel like has a very specific dialogue that you're kind of conducting there. And when you were working on that, when you were thinking about that, who was the audience? Like, who were you imagining as like kind of the audience of that, receiving that?
Myself. I mean, or people. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, yeah.
That's a great answer.
I think it's people that are kind of, yeah. I mean, that's the honest answer, I guess. Like people that are in this group, this small section of design that are, kind of have similar like-minded people that are have similar interests to myself. I guess it's, again, I think what I've benefited from in these shows has been that they aren't in like museums, and they're not for the general audience, and so I don't have to worry about a certain amount of people coming through the door, and so I haven't had to compromise the intent of the shows really. They can be really specific and sometimes not for the mass audience, or not planned for them, at least. Although I have to say, like, every gallery worries about people coming through the doors, even small ones. But I didn't really have to. That wasn't a mandate that I had to make something that, like, hundreds of thousands of people would enjoy. So I kind of like that, because I think that's, people like, like graphic design non-production, people like Andrew and Ellen have to, because they're really brilliant and smart, and they have these bigger opportunities at these larger institutions. They have to worry about that. Like, how can you bring a critical lens to a sort of show that has to be enjoyed by the masses? And so to me, they're doing a different kind of thing than I'm doing. And I don't know if I would be successful in that world the way they are. I think I would love to kind of continue doing things that are a bit smaller, that don't have to, that can be more specific in a way.
Yeah, that's kind of that. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of like what I was getting at. I didn't know how to phrase it, but that idea of kind of general audience versus very specific, and the trade-offs you have to make if that's something that you think about. So it's interesting that you are kind of focused on keeping it small, with this kind of specific audience, so you can have this, specific dialogue, I guess.
Yeah, and it's yeah, I don't truly know because also these shows have been, I haven't, again, the big difference between doing it in a big institution is the amount of time you get. Like, most of my shows have been like a month, or it's really short, and I haven't treated them that way in the way that they've been executed. They, like, all the curators I talk to say, do it like it's up for a year, even though it's make it look like it's going to be up for a year, even though it's going to only be up for a month. So that's what I sort of aim for, and document it like it's going to be, that it's, make a document that's going to last, and keep the conversation going beyond that month. And so that's how I kind of treat it. But yeah, so I think, I mean, the book, I guess, has had a pretty good lifespan, but again, I think that the book is more kind of a reader, but also a kind of platform for a dialogue that isn't always in kind of aligned completely with even the intent of the show. I think one of the criticisms was that I included things that are kind of against the premise of the show in a way. Like, I think Experimental Jet Set had, in fact, sort of was sort of, their show was actually a criticism. Their piece that they made, their commission, was almost like a critique on the content of the show.
Yeah.
And that was sort of, and I think, yeah, and like I think Rick Pointer wrote a thing about it, and that was sort of a criticism that it kind of, I don't know, maybe, I can't remember, somebody criticized it, I can't remember exactly who it was, but that that kind of weakens it a little bit. But I've always liked that part of it and felt like that was the most honest way to sort of represent the kind of dialogue that I want. And it isn't about sort of proving an idea, it's about opening up a discussion about it. Because I think also at the time, another kind of, again, this idea that I don't kind of stop myself, this idea of this speculative design thing at the time, now it's way more codified in my mind because that speculative everything came out like sort of like right after the show came out. And so it's the dialogue has been heightened around this idea, and it's way more clear what it is in at least in the product design realm than what I thought it was when I did it. And I started the idea of this whole show actually was originated in 2006, which is really a long time ago, in this task newsletter article that I did that was about like unrealized projects, and that being the sort of the equivalent of like what like sort of speculative architecture or paper architecture was, because there isn't a platform for graphic designers to produce work that isn't really meant to be executed, that kind of represents the sort of innovative or new ideas. In fact, they kind of end up in hard drives because they never get made. So it was sort of this platform to show really interesting ideas that maybe cause problems more than solve problems, or ask questions more than solve problems. And so that was, I sort of did this article for this task newsletter publication that I published with Emmett Byrne and Alex D'Armond in 2006. And so that was the beginning of that. So this basically, I used that article as the proposal for the exhibition in 2013, like 6 years after that. So it's gone kind of way back, which there wasn't any, like, the idea of speculative design in the terms that Dunn and Raby put it was like not even clear in my mind in 2006, although I interviewed Dunn and Raby about the idea in that article, which is sort of funny.
Wow. So maybe they got it from your interview.
No. I highly doubt it. They were definitely people that I was sort of looking at as models for this kind of practice and trying to find a parallel in graphic design.
I have just a couple quick questions just to wrap it up a little bit. I just want to close, kind of think about hear about how you think about all these other activities that you've done, things like task newsletter and things like the piece in the Experimental Jet Set book, and then your teaching and these exhibitions. How have those types of things changed you as a designer, or have things you've learned from working on those projects made their way into the kind of traditional client work that you do?
They're pretty different. I think there's a level of authorship that, I mean, I have a really great relationship with Jens Hoffman, the curator I work with, and we've worked together for since 2007 on a ton of exhibitions and stuff. And there's a level of he's wildly creative and also very respectful of other people's creativity, and so he's always given me a lot of creative freedom to try different kinds of things. And I think there's different levels of the kind of authorship that I may take in these projects that I'm sort of generating myself through a more or less a traditional role of a graphic designer. In some identities for exhibitions, I feel like there's different levels of a critical lens, let's say, or a commentary that go into these identities, and sometimes they come from Jens themselves. They're embedded in the sort of curatorial approach to a show, so it maybe doesn't come necessarily from me, but I see it how he sort of brings this sort of lens or humor even to do a lot of his exhibitions are about other exhibitions, and so there's this reflexiveness that he brings to it that I've learned a lot from, and myself, and and so yeah, but it's a sort of different. Yeah, it's not completely the same. Like I feel like in these other, task newsletter, again, it's the intent is very similar. I think the three of us were just really interested in the end. Like we started at the end of Immigrant, so it's like what could a new platform for talking about design be, and it was kind of this idea of looking at subjects outside of design through the lens of graphic design and what that would produce. So each issue was sort of meant to be about it. We only got to issue 2, unfortunately, but I think issue 2 is a really great issue. It was about a particular topic through the lens of graphic designers, and then the experimental jet set thing was just a super fortunate, I'm a totally great project just sitting there. And I have to give a lot of credit to them because they came to me. Their brief to me was like, we want you to sort of edit this glossary type index, and just the content was just so rich and incredible that I feel like anybody. I'm proud that I worked on it and produced it, but it was just great stuff. Anybody that had that opportunity, I was just lucky enough to be the one to have the opportunity, but anybody could make something great out of that. It's just so rich with information and they're, I've always been a fan of their work, so I read a lot of the interviews previously, so it was just fun for me to read all these things and learn more about their work and see this sort of evolution of a practice and I think that's one of the great things that I love about them most is they're super transparent about their ideas and how they change their minds about things, and they're not trying to like present these absolutes like that never change, and so they're actually open themselves up for criticism, which happens quite often, which I'm also feel really I would say protective, but I get upset when I see these sort of criticisms of them on blogs and stuff, because I think they're super generous. They're like offering their thoughts out there where nobody else does that. Nobody else writes you like a 1,000-word essay about like each piece that they do.
Right. Yeah. I know. I love it.
Yeah. And so they're kind of offer with every piece of work they do, they really are generous and offer you the opportunity to have a dialogue with them about what they're working on. And so I think they kind of, to me, have created this really interesting practice and great work, but also a way of having a dialogue with people that are interested in what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end it. And I think that a lot of the work that you do also kind of starts those types of dialogues. And I know that I've kind of gotten a lot from your various projects, so I really appreciate talking to you and kind of appreciate you kind of doing this other work and kind of helping me with this project. So thank you.
Thank you for
no
talking. Problem. It's fun. It's fun to. I think I just really like talking to people about design. I think, and that's sort of again the genesis of like all this work is just about conversations like this. And again, I think what makes it happen for me naturally is that I don't kind of try to. I don't see the end of what it is. It's just about conversations, and I don't have this like grand vision all the time of like what they end up being, and it just ends up being like a conversation, and it just produces stuff that you can share, and it kind of adds to kind of ends up being more conversations. So that's what's sort of fun about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of what this is. It was like I like talking to people. I like talking about design. It's like, oh, what if part of this project is just these conversations? So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I thought this was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This episode was recorded on September 28th, 2016. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter at Surface Podcast. You can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.